when I came into the room, something happened that I need to tell you about. Something a bit disturbing. Everybody stood up and someone said, "Be silent." And I'm afraid that this was only because I was coming into the room. And that is very disturbing. It makes me worry that it will hurt you and could even hurt me. And the problem is too much admiration and honor for a person. Now that's a tendency in Indian culture, to give a person, another human being, so much honor and admiration, more than a human being should ever get. And that hurts you because it means you think you're somewhere down below, and it could hurt me if I got used to that and thought I deserved it, which, however, I'm not going to let happen to me because I know better. But the point is, what really deserves your admiration and honor isn't a person, it's something more important than that. It's freedom. Freedom for you and freedom for others as well. Freedom for everyone. An ethical society where we all have rights and it's okay for all of us. That's what deserves the kind of honor and respect that you showed when I came into the room. That's what I honor and respect. And I hope you will join me. What is free software? Free software is software that respects your freedom and community. So it's free in the sense of freedom, not zero price. We're not talking about price at all. That's just a side issue. Free software is free. Copies of free software are frequently given gratis, but they can also be bought and sold. There's nothing wrong with that. So the issue here is not price. The issue here is freedom. So we sometimes refer to it as Swatantra software, to make that clear, to avoid the misunderstanding. So to understand the expression free software, think of free speech, not free beer. Of course, you don't have free speech in India. That's another fight that you're going to have to fight. Now, when a program is not free software, we call it non-free, proprietary, user-subjugating software. Because a non-free program creates a system of unjust power. The developer has power over the users through the program. And it's this power which is unjust. So that must not be. We should get rid of non-free software so that all software users do their computing in freedom. However, what I've said is very general. The program respects your freedom. What does that mean? I have to be more specific. A program is free software for you if you, as a user, have the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it so the program does your computing as you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help others, to make exact copies and redistribute them when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and distribute them to others when you wish. To be adequate, these freedoms must apply to all areas of life, all activities, anything you might be doing. But none of them is required. These activities are not, these 4 things you're free to do are not obligatory. You're free to do them if you wish. Thus, Freedom 0 says you're free to run the program as you wish. But it's not required. If you are a masochist, you could run the program the way you don't wish. You can also decide not to run the program. You're not required to use it. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study and change the source code so the program does your computing as you wish. You must be free to do this, but it's not required. You can also use the program exactly as you got it without studying anything. And freedom 2 is the freedom to make and redistribute exact copies. You must be free to do this, but it's not required. We don't say you must give a copy or sell a copy to somebody. We just say no one else should stop you. It's up to you when you do that. You may feel on some circumstances that you should, but we don't order you to do it. And Freedom 3 says that if you've made a modified version, you can distribute copies of that. But it's not required. You can make a modified version and use it privately. It's up to you whether to make it available to the public or to some people. The point is, you must be free to do so if you choose. So, if a program comes with these 4 freedoms, then it's free software because the social system of using and distributing the program is an ethical one that respects freedom and community. But if one of these freedoms is missing or inadequate, then, or insufficiently present with a certain program, that is, then the program is proprietary because it imposes an unethical social system on its users. Thus, the distinction between free and proprietary software is not a technical distinction. It's a social, ethical, and political distinction, which is why it's so important. A technical distinction we can leave to whatever engineer is in charge of that project. But this affects the freedom of every user, so we must insist. The use of a free program in society is development, because the knowledge embodied in that free program is available to the users for them to understand, maintain, adapt, extend, and apply in other ways. But the use of a proprietary program in society is not development. It's dependence, it's subjugation. So, we must treat it as a social problem and strive to put an end to that use. To write a free program is a contribution to society. How much of a contribution? That depends on the details. Some programs are very useful, and some programs are not useful at all. But at least it's being made available. If you release it as free software, then it's being made available to other people in an ethical way, so that it can contribute its potential to society. But writing a proprietary program is no contribution. It's a power grab. In social terms, the proprietary program acts as a trap. If it has attractive features, those are the bait for the trap. Their purpose is to attract people to fall into the trap. So, paradoxically, the more convenient and attractive those features are, the more harmful the program is. Though those features don't make the program better, they make it more harmful. So if you have the choice to write a proprietary program or do nothing, you should do nothing, because that way you do no harm to society. Writing a proprietary program is harming society. You must never do that. Thus, the goal of the free software movement is that all programs be free so that all their users can be free. But what makes these four freedoms essential? Why define free software this way? Each freedom has a reason. Freedom 2, the freedom to help others to redistribute exact copies of the program, is essential on fundamental moral grounds, so that you can live an upright, ethical life as a good member of your community. If you use a program that does not come with freedom number 2, then you are in danger of falling into a moral dilemma, which could happen at any moment. Whenever your good friend says, "That program is nice, could I have a copy?" In that moment, you will face a choice between two evils. One evil is to give your good friend a copy and violate the license of the program. The other evil is to refuse your good friend a copy and comply with the license of the program. If you are in this dilemma, you ought to choose the lesser evil, which is to give your good friend a copy and violate the license of the program. What makes this the lesser evil? Well, if you can't avoid doing wrong to somebody or other, it's less bad to do wrong to somebody who deserves it because he has done wrong. Now, we can assume that your good friend is a good member of your community and normally deserves your cooperation and hasn't done anything to deserve for you to be mean and unhelpful. By contrast, the developer of this proprietary program has deliberately attacked the social solidarity of your community, and that's very bad. So, if you are stuck with doing wrong to one or the other, do it to the developer. But being the lesser evil does not mean it's good. It's never good to make an agreement and break it. Not even an agreement like this one, which is inherently evil, so that keeping the agreement is worse than breaking it. Still, breaking it is not good. And if you give your good friend a copy, what will she have? She will have an unauthorized copy of a proprietary program, which is a nasty thing, almost as nasty as an authorized copy. It's not nasty because it's unauthorized. On the contrary, it's nastier if it's authorized. It's nasty because it's proprietary. So when you have fully understood this issue, what should you really do? You should make sure that you are never in this dilemma. I know two ways. One is, don't have any friends. That's the world that the proprietary software developers have in mind for you. That's what they're trying to lure you and pressure you into. The other way to avoid the dilemma, my method, is don't have that program. If you don't have a copy, you don't have to worry about what you would do if someone asked you to copy it. That's my response. If someone offers me a proprietary program on the condition I not share it with you, then no matter how attractive it might be, I tell him, my conscience does not permit me to accept your conditions. So take your nasty program out of here. I don't want it. I hope you don't want it either. I hope you will join me in refusing to have it. And we must also reject the propaganda terms that they use to demonize sharing, to demonize cooperation. Terms like pirate. When they call people who share pirates, what are they really saying? They're saying that helping other people, cooperation, is the moral equivalent of attacking ships. And morally speaking, nothing could be more wrong than that, because attacking ships is very bad. But sharing is good. Sharing should be encouraged, not demonized. So don't call it piracy. Reject the propaganda of the enemy. When people ask me what I think of piracy, I say attacking ships is very bad. And if they ask me what I think of music piracy, I say, from what I've read, when pirates attack, they don't do it by playing musical instruments badly and very loud. It might work, but it would take too long, so they use arms. So their piracy is not music piracy, it's just piracy. The point is, I look for a humorous way of pointedly rejecting the propaganda meaning that someone else was using. Because it's not enough to avoid the term yourself. You want to show that it's propaganda and denounce it when other people use it. That's the way you oppose their propaganda campaign. So I've explained the reason for freedom 2, the freedom to help others, the freedom to redistribute exact copies, essential on fundamental moral grounds. Freedom 0, to run the program as you wish, is essential so you can control your computing. And you deserve to control your computing. But there are proprietary programs whose licenses restrict even the use of the authorized copies. There's a proprietary program for managing websites whose license forbids using it to publish anything that criticizes the developer. So in this case, proprietary software literally denies users their freedom of speech. Obviously, if you're not free to use your copy or the copy that was provided for you to use in whatever way you wish, then you don't control your computing, so freedom 0 is essential. But it's not enough, because that's the freedom to either do or not do whatever the code of the program is already set up to do, which means the developer continues imposing his decisions on you, not through the license, if you have freedom 0, but still through the code itself. So in order to control the computing you do with that program, you need freedom 1, the freedom to study the source code and change it to make the program do what you wish. If you don't have this freedom, you can't even tell what that program is doing. Non-free programs that lack freedom 1 frequently contain malicious features. They're malicious because they're designed to hurt the user. They do things such as spy on the user, restrict the user intentionally, and there are also backdoors which receive remote commands and do things to the user. And the users have no choice about these things. And this is not a rare danger. There are many rare dangers in life, many bad things that happen once in a while, but they probably won't happen to you today. This is not a rare danger. Malicious features in proprietary software are the usual case. Almost everyone in the world who uses proprietary software is using malicious software. For instance, one proprietary package that contains known examples of all three of these kinds of malicious features that you may have heard of is called Microsoft Windows. We know of spy features in Windows that transmit data about the use of the computer to a server. Of course, the features designed to restrict the user, those the users can see. If the system says, I won't let you do this, it would be natural, but I decided you can't do it, the user sees that. These features are known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, or digital handcuffs. And they are designed to restrict what users can do with the data in their computers. Then there are back doors known in Windows. One of these back doors allows Microsoft to forcibly install software changes remotely without asking permission of the nominal owner of the computer. I say nominal owner because in practice, once Microsoft has arranged for Windows to run in that computer, Microsoft has owned that computer. The user is completely helpless. As a result of this universal backdoor, any malicious feature that is not in Windows today could be installed remotely tomorrow. In other words, Windows is not just malware, it is universal malware. Malware means software designed to hurt people. And most people, strangely, apply that term only to things like viruses, but it's equally applicable to software that users know that they're running, but which is designed with malicious features. Windows is malware, but it's not unique. Mac OS is malware too, because it has digital handcuffs. Of course, the newer Apple products, the iThings, they're much nastier. They have a known spy feature. They have the tightest digital handcuffs ever. Apple is a pioneer in attacking its users. Apple took this to the point where users couldn't even choose what programs to install. Of course, now Microsoft is following the same path. The users invented a term to describe breaking that part of the handcuffs. They called it jailbreaking, which effectively says that the iThings are jails for their users. That was the evil genius of Steve Jobs. He figured out how to get people to beg to be put in jail. And there's a back door as well. So the Apple products are malware. Flash Player is malware. It has a surveillance feature and digital handcuffs. The Amazon Swindle is malware. Of course, their official name for it is Kindle, but I call it the Swindle because that's its purpose. Its purpose is to swindle readers out of the traditional freedoms of readers of books. For instance, there's the freedom to buy a book anonymously, paying cash. Amazon doesn't allow that. The Swindle makes that impossible because most recent books are available only from Amazon, and Amazon makes users identify themselves, which is one reason I would never buy anything from Amazon. I buy things with cash, and I do it anonymously. Then there's the freedom to give a book to someone else, or lend the book to someone else, which is the basis of friendship between people who read, or even to sell the book, perhaps to a used bookstore. Amazon takes these away through digital handcuffs, together with end-user license agreements, which say that the users don't own the books. Amazon does not respect private property. Then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish and eventually pass it on to your children. Amazon eliminates this with a back door in the swindle. Now, we don't know everything that back door can do because we can't study the source code. We know about the back door by observation. In 2009, Amazon remotely deleted thousands of copies of a particular book. Some people saw the book disappear while they were in the middle of reading it. And the book with which Amazon demonstrated the Orwellian nature of this product was 1984 by George Orwell. You can't get more ironic than that. If I were making up fiction, I wouldn't dare make this up. It would seem too implausible. But this is what happened. 1984 is a book that you should all read. It's about a totalitarian state that did things such as destroy books that told about history the state didn't like, as well as other nastier things. You should all read it, but not on the swindle. Now, the official name of that product is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. Evidently, it's a product intended to burn our books, but it will never burn mine. I'm not going to use any such device, ever. And I hope you will join me. I'm going to get books that give me the same freedoms that readers of books have had in the past. Then most cellular phones have malware in them, which sends out tracking information on request and has a back door that allows the phone to be remotely converted into a listening device. And it can listen to all the conversation in the room. It's not required to speak into the microphone. This is why I don't have a cellular phone. I'm sure I would find it tremendously useful, but there are limits to what I'm willing to do for my convenience. Those programs still have bugs because the developers are human and they make mistakes. And the user of a program without Freedom 1 is just as helpless facing an accidental error as facing a deliberate malicious feature. If you use a program without Freedom 1, you're a prisoner of that program. We free software developers are human too. We also make mistakes. The code of our free programs has bugs too, because every non-trivial program has bugs. We can't avoid it. But if you find a bug in our free code or anything in the code that you don't like, you're free to change it because we did not make you a prisoner. We cannot be perfect. We can respect your freedom. So Freedom 1 is essential. But it's not enough, because that's the freedom to personally study and change the source code, or to do so inside one organization. That's not enough, because there are millions of users that don't know how to program. They don't know how to exercise Freedom 1. They couldn't fix a bug themselves. They couldn't check the code themselves. But even for programmers like me who know how to do that, freedom one is not enough, because we're busy doing certain tasks, certain activities, and we don't have time to check lots of other software. In fact, there's so much free software in the world now that no user could possibly study and master all the source code of the program she uses, nor personally write all the changes she might want, because that's more work than one human being can possibly do. So the only way we can fully have control over our computing is to do it together, cooperating. And for that we need freedom 3, the freedom to contribute to your community, the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and distribute them when you wish. With this freedom, if a few users make an improved version of a free program, they can distribute copies of that version to others, they can publish that version, and then everybody gets to install it or not. Even the users that don't know how to program can use this improved version, because they don't have to write it for themselves, it's already been written. Without freedom 3, yes, each user would be free to write that change, but what a waste it would be to write the same change millions of times. And the users that don't know how to program, they would be excluded since they can't write that change themselves. That's not adequate. So freedom 3 is essential. And thus I've demonstrated that the 4 freedoms are essential. And all users get the benefit of the 4 freedoms. Every user can exercise freedoms 0 and 2. The freedom to run the program as you wish and to redistribute exact copies. These don't require any programming, so non-programmer users can exercise these freedoms. They directly get the benefit. Freedoms 1 and 3, the freedom to study and change the source code, and then optionally to distribute copies of your modified version, these entail programming. So any given user can exercise these more or less according to how much he knows how to program. Of course, many people can do a little bit of programming and they can make easy changes, which is quite useful. It's a lot better than not being able to change anything. But many people don't even know how to make easy changes. They can't exercise these freedoms, but they still get the benefit of these freedoms. Because when users who are programmers improve the program and release their modified versions, then everybody gets to use those modified versions or not as she wishes, and thus gets the benefit of living in a society where we have these freedoms. And the 4 freedoms together give us democracy. A free program develops democratically under the control of its users, because everybody is free to participate in society's decision about the future of the program, which is simply the sum total of the decisions all the users make for how to change the program and which versions to use. By contrast, a proprietary program develops under the sole and total control of its developer, and functions effectively as an instrument giving that developer power over the users, power with which he can command them, exploit them, and abuse them. Ultimately, with software, there are just 2 possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. In order for the users to control the program, they need the 4 freedoms. That's why the 4 freedoms are essential. They're the freedoms that the users need in order to have effective control over the program. And so if they have those freedoms, it's free software. Free software is the software that the users control. But if they don't have these freedoms, then the program controls the users, and the developer controls the program, so that program is an instrument of unjust power. Proprietary software must be abolished. So the ultimate goal of the free software movement is the liberation of cyberspace and all of its inhabitants, including you. We invite you to escape from proprietary software, to come live with us in the free world that we have built. I started the free software movement in 1983. I wanted to make it possible to use a computer in freedom. That was impossible at the time because a computer won't do anything without an operating system installed. The operating system is a collection of lots of programs that work together to do the usual jobs and provide a platform for implementing everything else. In 1983, all the operating systems for modern computers were proprietary. So if you bought a new computer, to make it useful, to make it do anything, you had to have a non-free operating system installed, and there went your freedom. The way I thought of to change this was to write another operating system and make it free. I was an operating system developer. There was a chance I could succeed at this job. In other words, there was a chance that I could give people a way to escape from proprietary software by doing technical work in my own field. And that meant it was my duty. You see, I was aware of the injustice of proprietary software, which most people did not recognize as an injustice. I had the skill necessary to try to eliminate this injustice, to enable people to start escaping, and it looked like nobody else was going to do this if I did not. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this job. It was my duty. It's as if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and there's no one else around and it's not Bush, then you have a moral duty to save this person. Well, perhaps that statement is too strong. There might be other people we could identify about whom I should not make the claim that you have a moral duty to save them. People like Cheney and other officials that support torture and imprisonment without trial, and Obama is one of them. But fortunately, I don't need to answer the question of who those are because I don't know how to swim. However, in the real case in my life, the work to be done was not swimming, it was writing lots of code. And that I knew how to do. So I decided to develop a free software operating system. I decided to recruit others to help to finish it sooner. And I decided to make it a Unix-like operating system, both so that it would be portable and so that all the Unix users would find it easy to switch. And then I gave it the name GNU as a joke, because part of the spirit of hacking is even when you're doing something serious, you look for ways to make jokes. And by the way, hacking means playful cleverness, which sometimes is done with a computer, but can also be done without computers. So the name GNU is in the hacking spirit. What's the joke? GNU is a recursive acronym. It stands for GNU's Not Unix. So it's GNU, GNU's Not Unix. And it's recursive because the G stands for GNU's. Well, of course, programmers love jokes that involve recursion. But that's not enough to make it a joke. in order to be a joke, it needs another meaning. Why GNU and not ANU, FNU, SNU, UNU? Because those are not words, at least not in any language I knew at the time. So without another meaning, they're not jokes. But GNU is the name of an animal that lives in Africa, of which these are not very realistic drawings. So it had another meaning. But it's better than that. GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless wordplays, because, according to the dictionary, the G is silent and is pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, you can spell it GNU and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So the result is this word is associated with humor. When people see this word, they're already almost ready to laugh. Given a specific, meaningful reason to use it as the name of a programming project, I couldn't resist. However, when it's the name of this operating system, please do not follow the dictionary. If you call it the new operating system, you'll get people confused. You see, we've been working on it for 28 years now and using it for almost 20 years, so it's not new anymore. But it still is GNU, and it will always be GNU, so please pronounce it GNU. There's another erroneous pronunciation you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. How did such a bizarre error become common? It was a confusion that occurred among a particular group of people and spread. During the 1980s, our work was to either find or write all the hundreds of components we needed for a complete Unix-like operating system. In 1992, we had almost everything, but one major essential component was missing. That component is the kernel, which is the program that allocates the computer's resources to all the other programs you run. We started developing a kernel in 1990, but that kernel didn't work out very well. People mostly don't find it useful. But in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, liberated it by releasing it under the GNU General Public License. Once Linux was free software, the combination of Linux and all the pieces of the GNU system made a complete free operating system, which was basically GNU, but also contained Linux. In other words, it was the GNU plus Linux system, if you want to call it by an appropriate name. However, the people who combined Linux with all those other components were so focused on this one thing, Linux, that they perceived all the rest of the system as a small add-on. And they started talking about the whole thing as the Linux system, which is not fair to us. So please, if you hear somebody talking about using Linux, say it's not Linux, it's GNU, and it's used with Linux. Linux is in there too. Please call it the GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux system and give us equal mention. Since we started it, since we are the ones who set the goal, and since we wrote a bigger part of it than anyone else did, it seems that equal mention is not too much to ask. But what makes this issue of naming important is that the names GNU and Linux are associated with different ideas as well. Since 28 years ago, the name GNU is associated with our ideas of freedom and community, with ethical ideas, with a philosophy that campaigns for freedom, The name Linux is associated with different ideas, with the ideas of Mr. Torvalds. And he rejects the idea that users deserve freedom. He doesn't think you deserve freedom, that you deserve to control the software you use. He doesn't think he deserves to control the software he uses. He just doesn't care about the issue. And he has a right to his views. But you have to think which views you want to promote. When you call the system GNU, you refer to our ideas, the ideas that are the reasons we developed GNU. If you call it Linux, you're referring to Torvalds' ideas. So it's not just that mentioning GNU is the right thing to do. It also helps our campaign for freedom, because it's not over yet. We haven't won freedom for all users of software yet. We've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. And you will notice that many of the people who talk about the GNU plus Linux system talk about it without ever raising the ethical issue of whether you should have freedom. They talk about it in a purely practical way, considering only convenience issues. Why this strange blind spot? And you'll notice that those people often won't say free software. Often they say a different term, open source. The term open source was coined in 1998 by people in the free software community who didn't want the issue of freedom to be discussed. So they made up another term to use, which had not been used before. And with that term, they had the opportunity to decide which ideas to leave out. And they left out the entire ethical level of the issue. That's why some people say open source. That's why I don't call my work open source. I want people to think about freedom. I want to call attention to the issue of freedom. So of course I'm not going to use a term that was designed to avoid that issue. And I hope you won't use it either. Of course, your views are up to you. You may care about freedom, or you may be like the people who don't care. You're entitled to promote your views either way. But if you see value in what I'm saying, please show your support. And the way you show it is by saying free, libre, swatantra software, and not saying open source. So if you want to support our cause, if somebody else starts a discussion about open source, you can respond, I'd rather not discuss it in those terms, because I think the most important issue at stake here is our freedom. So I'm going to say free software, free as in freedom. I choose not to discuss it, calling it open source. Now, their idea was that they would talk about the same set of software, but they adopted a different criterion that's written differently, and it has been interpreted by a different group of people. So naturally, they don't draw the line in the same place we draw the line. There are programs that they consider open source and that we do not consider free software because their licenses are too restrictive. They're on the wrong side of the line for us. In addition, we are concerned with the user's practical freedom, not just with the source code. Nowadays, many computers come with an operating system that the user is not allowed to replace at all. The computer blocks the user from installing any other software. Now, sometimes those executables are compiled from source code that's free. But those executables are not free. The people who talk about open source, they don't care about this. They just look at the source license and they say, okay. And we look at that same source license and we say, yeah, it's okay, that's a free license. That source code is free software. But the executable in your computer is not free because you can't replace it. And if you can't put in your version and run it, then in practice you don't have freedom one. The freedom to change the software to make it do your computing the way you wish. If you can't run your version, if you have to run the version somebody else supplied to you, then in practice you can't make it do what you wish. So even in practical terms, there is a difference between free software and open source. But most programs that are open source are also free software. Most of the time, the difference is which philosophical ideas do you want to recommend to other people, which is, of course, tremendously important in the political debate about your freedom. Now, if we don't talk about freedom, then we don't teach other people to think about freedom. And the result is that lots of people don't think about it. Even in the free software community, most users do not think about the issue of freedom. And the result is that the community is vulnerable. We have lost our freedom several times because of failure to care about it enough. For instance, in 1992, the GNU Plus Linux system was made, and it became possible to buy a PC and install a free system and run it in freedom. But it was not easy at the beginning. You had to be a real expert. So people started to work on making it easier. They started developing distributions of GNU/Linux designed to facilitate installation. A few years later, there were several distributions competing in a community where most people didn't think about freedom. So the developers of some distributions had the idea of adding some non-free programs to the system and presenting that as an advantage, saying, use our distro because it can do this and this. Now, a freedom-loving user would look at that and say, yuck, this isn't a free system anymore. I don't want that. But most users didn't even think about the issue. So they said, oh, great, this version can do these things. I'll use it. So those distros got more successful. Then the developers of other distros looked at that and said, uh-oh, they're gaining. We're losing. We have to add those non-free programs too, and then we can catch up with them. So that's what happened. Over the next few years, all the distros put in non-free software one way or another. 10 years ago, when people asked me, where can I get a copy of this system? All I could say was, I'm sorry to say I don't know any place I can recommend. There are dozens of different distros and not one single distro that's entirely free so that I could recommend it. So we had reached freedom and we fell back. And we fell back because not enough of us insisted on holding on to freedom. Some of us did, but we were too few to pull the community with us. So that now you see how we can lose freedom in the free software community. I'm happy to say that today there are completely free distros of GNU/Linux. For instance, there is Ututo, UTUTO, and there is BLAG, whose name is another recursive acronym. It stands for BLAG, Linux, and GNU. And there is GNUsense, which is also a joke. You see, my title as the head of the GNU project is the Chief GNUsense, spelled G followed by nuisance. However, the distro GNU Sense is spelled differently. It's spelled GNU Sense. And then there is Triskel and Parabola and Dragora. There are several more. You can look in gnu.org/distros for the list of all the completely free distros that we know of. There are not that many of them. And as you can tell, they are not the well-known successful distros. Those continue to contain non-free software, which means that we have begun to recover the freedom we lost, but just begun. We have a long way to go to reach the point where we can expect that if somebody installs GNU/Linux, he's installing only free software. And then our freedom was wounded in another way. Nowadays, the source code of Linux is not entirely free software, and it's not entirely source code either. If you look at some of the supposed source files of Linux, you will find long tables of numbers. And these tables of numbers are actually executable programs disguised, dressed up as source code. But a table of numbers is not source code. The real source code for those programs is not available, so they are not free software. In addition, many of them carry explicit non-free licenses. How did this happen? How did non-free software get into Linux, the kernel? Well, Torvalds decided to put it in. You see, he never defended freedom as a matter of principle. In 1992, he made the code of Linux free software for some other reason. And some years later, he decided to put in non-free software for some other reason. And because it wasn't a matter of principle for him, he didn't have to do any soul searching. What this demonstrates is when our freedom depends on people who don't value freedom, it's precarious. That's how it got partly taken away. So nowadays, in the free distros, we use modified versions of Linux with the binary blobs removed. So we can't use Torvalds' version of Linux. We have to make our own version of Linux to include in our free GNU/Linux distros. For instance, we have one version which is called Linux Libre. Libre is Spanish for free. So the point is, this is Linux made free. And we make it free by deleting those non-free pieces. It's easy to do because we have a script to do it. However, while that gives us a program which is free software, it does not give us free software to run the devices that use the blobs. We just don't support them. Well, it's a fact that those devices can't be run with free software. So what we do is avoid disguising that fact by giving people non-free software. We take out the non-free software and people see in the free world you can't use those devices. It's too bad, but it's true. How could we change that? That requires a much harder job of reverse engineering, which is tremendously important. If you really want to contribute something important to the free world, focus on reverse engineering. Because while any free program that you release is a contribution to society, how much of a contribution it is depends on details. The more important the job is, the more you contribute by doing it. There are some high priority projects you can find a list in FSF.org. And among these high priority projects are improving free CAD software, improving free software for accessibility for handicapped people, and reverse engineering to develop free drivers and free firmware to run additional devices. Tremendously important if we want to spread freedom. So ultimately, our future depends on what we value. If we value freedom, we can make an effort to hold on to it. If we don't think about freedom, we'll let it slip through our fingers without noticing. The fool and his freedom are soon parted. And that's why I focus my efforts nowadays on teaching people about the ideas of freedom. There are lots of people writing free software. I'm not needed for that anymore. What I personally could add to that would be a small fraction. But there are not so many of us talking about freedom and explaining these ideas and teaching other people to join us in demanding freedom. That's needed more. In fact, one of the best ways you could help the movement is by learning to give speeches like this, by thinking carefully about these issues and writing about them. Anytime other people discuss what software to use for something and they raise the issue considering only the superficial practical questions, you can bring up the ethical questions and say, we shouldn't think of this based only on short-term practical convenience. We have to do what's right. And even when you don't win a particular battle, you will educate others so it will still achieve something. And after enough educating of others, you'll win a battle. Of course, it helps to organize. You don't have to do it in a solitary way. Form a free software activist group and work together. Think about different ways you can work for the cause. Look at how other people have done it and pick ways that are good, try them, and the ones that work, continue, and the ones where you get stuck, drop them and try something else. And nowadays, there are new ways to lose your computing freedom. Many websites send the user non-free programs to run in their browsers. These programs are typically written in JavaScript. And usually they're non-free, and some of them are malicious. Well, I'm happy to say that a program is now being developed which you can load into your browser and block non-free, non-trivial JavaScript code. And it even has a feature to find the way to send the site a complaint saying, please make your JavaScript code free or just remove it, because I'm not going to run it as long as it's non-free. So I hope that this way they'll start getting lots of complaints and start changing things. In the meantime, when I browse, I have JavaScript turned off, just to make sure I don't run any of those non-free programs, and you should too. Now, there are some sites that don't work, and I don't use them. Freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice. When India won freedom, that involved sacrifice too. People who say, sure, I'd like freedom as long as it doesn't require me to give up any convenience or any competitive advantage. Those people are saying, That's how little I value freedom. What I really want is other things. Freedom, that's the last thing. People who don't value freedom will lose it. If you want to have freedom, you've got to value it, and that means being ready to give up something else for it. Fortunately, in our struggle, you don't have to give up something really important. Just a little. You can get by without non-free software. Now, another way to lose your freedom is if you do your computing in somebody else's server instead of doing it in your own computer. This is known as software as a service, or SaaS. And what it means is, instead of doing your computing on the data that you have by running a program in your own computer, you send the data to somebody's server, and there it does the computing by running programs that you can't see or touch, and sends you the result. Or it takes action for you. And that means you lose control over that computing. It's just as if you ran a non-free program. It's the same result as if you ran a non-free program, but the structure of the problem is different. In one case, you have the program, but you can't control it. In the other case, you don't even have a copy. So, using SaaS is equivalent to using a non-free program. But it's worse than that. I've explained how some non-free programs have spyware features that send data to someone's server. Well, if a person is using SaaS, he has to send all the relevant data to the server. It's the same result. It's not done through a special hidden piece of code, but still the server gets all that data, and who knows what it's going to do with that data then. But it's worse than that. I explained how some proprietary programs have backdoors, and in some cases the backdoor is universal and allows remote changes in the software. For instance, in the case of Microsoft Windows and Google Chrome, they both have backdoors of that kind. Well, with SaaS, the server operator, of course, can install different software in the server. It's his computer. Of course, he should be able to install different software in it. But the result is, he can change the way the user's computing is done at any time and without consulting the user. So it's the same result. Thus, SaaS is inherently equivalent to using a proprietary program with spyware and a universal backdoor. The last topic I want to discuss is free software and education. Schools and all educational activities are morally obliged to teach only free software. There are 4 reasons for this. The most superficial and least important is to save money. Now, free software does not mean gratis software. It's not always gratis. But it does offer the opportunity to save money if you want to. For instance, if the education ministry gets a copy of a free program, it can use its freedom to make copies and give a copy to every school. And then the school, using Freedom 0, can install that in its computers and run it. And they don't have to pay for permission to do this because they're free to do it. However, although saving money in education is good, it's not as important an issue as doing education ethically. Yes, it's nice to do education more efficiently, but most important, we have to do good education rather than harmful education. So when we mention the possibility of saving money, we must never bring it out last, as if that were the thing that's really supposed to convince you. No, mention it first and say it's superficial and secondary. And besides, some proprietary software developers eliminate the possibility of cost savings by providing gratis copies of their non-free software to schools. And why do they do this? It's not because they want to help education. No, it's because they're trying to use the schools to impose on society a dependence on their product. For instance, I heard yesterday that AutoCAD is offered gratis to engineering colleges in India as part of a scheme to impose dependence on AutoCAD on all of India. The schools which accept this offer are doing harm. Here's how those schemes work. The idea is that the developer provides these gratis copies of non-free software to the school. The school teaches the students to use them, and they become dependent, and then they graduate, and then they're still dependent, but you can be sure that company is not going to offer them gratis copies after they graduate. And some of them go to work for companies. The developer does not offer those companies gratis copies. So, if the school does what it's asked to do and teaches its and directs its students into the path of dependence, they can pull the rest of society with them into permanent dependence. That's the plan. It's like offering the schools gratis needles full of addictive drugs, saying, inject these into your students to make them dependent. The first dose is gratis. The school would reject those drugs, gratis or not, and it should reject the non-free software, gratis or not, because the school has a social mission, which is to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, cooperating, independent, and free society. In the software field, that means graduating people who are capable users of free software and not teaching any non-free software. To teach dependence is to harm society. However, there's a deeper reason for the education of the best programmers. Some people are natural-born programmers. Maybe some of you are. Natural-born programmers, at a certain point, often from 10 years to 13 years, become fascinated with computing. They want to know how everything works. If they use a program, they say, how does it do this? But if the program is proprietary, when these kids ask, how does it do this, the teacher can only respond, I'm sorry, we can't find out. It's a secret. And thus, education is not allowed. A non-free program is knowledge withheld. It is the enemy of the spirit of education, so it should not be tolerated in a school. But if the program is free, the teacher can explain as much as he knows and then say, if you want to know more, here's the source code. Read it and you'll understand everything. And those kids will read it because they yearn to understand everything. And the teacher can say, if you come across anything in the code you can't understand by yourself, show it to me and we'll figure it out together. And this gives the natural-born programmer the chance to learn a crucial lesson. That code is badly written. Don't write it that way. Natural-born programmers tend to be very clever. They can write lots of code that does the intended job, but that other people will not be able to understand. That's not good code. So how does the natural-born programmer become a good programmer? How do you learn to write good, clear code? You have to read lots of code and write lots of code. Only free software offers you the chance to read the code of large programs that we really use. And then you have to write lots of code, meaning you have to write code in large programs. To do that, you need to start small. But what does start small mean in this case? It doesn't mean writing small programs. The challenges of large programs don't appear in small programs. No, the way you start small in addressing those challenges is by writing small changes for large programs. Only free software gives you the chance to do that. Any school can offer natural-born programmers the chance to master their skill and their talent, but only if it's a free software school. However, there is a deeper reason. For the sake of moral education, education in citizenship. It's not enough for a school to teach facts and skills. Schools must teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping others. Therefore, every class must have the following rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the others, including the source code, in case someone here wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it is not allowed to bring non-free software into this class. The school must set a good example by following its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies, including the source code, with the students, with everyone in the class. This school, like all schools, must migrate to free software. And if you have a connection with the school, as a student, as an employee, as a teacher, as an official, or as a parent, it's your responsibility to pressure for the school to stop teaching proprietary software. And no matter what the obstacles are, you have to organize to overcome them. For more information, look at GNU.org and FSF.org, which is the site of the Free Software Foundation. There is also the Free Software Foundation of India, which is at gnu.org.in. And you can join the Free Software Foundation of India. It needs your support. Now I would like to present my other identity. I am Saint Ignatius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as an extensible text editor that I wrote, which developed into a way of life for many users because it was extended so much they could do all their computing inside Emacs. And then it became a church with the launch of the news group alt.religion.emacs, which you might be amused to visit. In the Church of Emacs, we have no services, only software. We have a great schism between several rival versions of Emacs, and we have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must pronounce the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then, if you become a real expert, you can celebrate this with our ceremony the Fubar Mitzvah, in which you recite lines from our sacred scriptures, namely the system source code. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which means anyone who has never used Emacs. According to the Church of Emacs, offering the Virgin the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. According to one Tibetan sect, it's sufficient to invoke them automatically under the control of a program. However, the mainstream church believes that you only get spiritual merit if you type the commands by hand. The Church of Emacs has certain benefits compared with other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy, but it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers that are under your control or that are set up for your regular use, and install a wholly free operating system, where holy can be spelled in more than one way, and then only use and install free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint, and you too will have the right to wear a halo, if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. People have occasionally asked me whether it is a sin in the Church of Emacs to use the other editor, VI. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast in Roman numerals. However, using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. And my halo is not an old computer disk, but it was a computer disk in a previous life. So, thank you.